Good afternoon, and welcome to the latest episode of the Meese Energy Podcast. My name is Jamie Ingram, Senior Editor at Meese, and I'm delighted to be joined today from Nicosia in Cyprus by Peter Stevenson, our East Mediterranean Editor. How are you, Pete?
I'm fine, thank you, Jamie. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Well, as we look at the energy markets, there's no sign of an end to the incredible levels of volatility that have been unleashed by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And EU countries are coming under growing pressure to end their addiction to Russian gas. Not just is this a clear strategic vulnerability, but there is also considerable discomfort that European states are transferring billions of dollars of revenue to Russia in return for the gas. Just recently, the US and European Commission announced a task force to reduce Europe's dependence on Russian fossil fuels. The US announced that it will work with international partners and strive to ensure additional LNG volumes to the EU market of at least 15 billion cubic meters in 2022. Now, given that this is only around 10% of the 155 billion cubic meters that EU states imported from Russia in 2021, it's clear that this is just a drop in the ocean and that it won't come anywhere close to replacing Russian gas supplies. If we look at the US, gas exports from there to Europe have certainly increased of late, but that's more to do with economic realities than political directives. Simply put, gas prices in Europe are so high that supplies are being pulled away from other markets to the continent. Coupled with the startup of new US LNG export facilities earlier this year, and it's no surprise that flows have surged. Kepler figures show that US LNG exports overall and to Europe specifically hit record highs last month. Of the 7.3 million tons that the US exported in March, 5.6 million tons went to Europe. The worrying thing for Europe is that this is happening while imports of gas from Russia remain very high. So rather than replacing Russian gas, this is simply supplementing it. And it's hard to see scope for many further near-term increases from the US or elsewhere, no matter how many political directives are issued. So that's the near-term picture. Longer term, Europe's renewed focus on energy security should result in a boom in LNG export projects around the world. One basin that could capitalize in particular is the East Med, where it feels like Cyprus has been on the cusp of developing its gas reserves for a decade now. Pete, you've been speaking with policymakers in Cyprus on this very topic, so what's the feeling there?
Yeah, I caught up last week with Demetris Fessas. He's the acting Director General of Cyprus' state Hydrocarbons company. We talked a little bit about the energy transition, Cyprus's role in the East Med Gas Forum, the upstream picture here in Cyprus, but we also discussed, as you were alluding to, the impact of the current Russian invasion of Ukraine and what that's having on regional gas markets.
Great. Well, let's hear that conversation then.
Thanks, Peter. And first of all, thanks very much for the opportunity to participate on this call. Indeed, yeah, there's a lot of the things happening at the moment. Obviously, at the forefront of everyone's mind is the Russian invasion into the Ukraine and the crisis, and it's going to have, it is having an impact at the moment. And for sure, it's going to have some medium-term and long-term impacts. I think it's worth starting off with recognizing, in terms of the energy market, specifically in the EU, we were, even before the Ukraine crisis, we were experiencing a lot of volatility and high prices as we were coming out of the COVID. There is also, and there was also, the EU leading the way on the energy transition and what impact that was having on the market. So it's good to recognize that there was issues around the energy markets before the crisis, and for sure the Ukraine crisis has exacerbated the issues. The Russian invasion of the Ukraine is indeed a tragedy, and in terms of the energy markets, the EU is putting together a response, and it's specifically revisiting issues around energy security and also seeing how they can manage within that the existing targets, or even look to accelerate the targets for the energy transition. So in terms of the EU's approach, and obviously Cyprus being part of the EU, we're very cognizant of the approach that the EU wants to take. And it's developing its strategy for the short, the medium, and the long term. I think within that, we think that the East Med gas supply is well placed to be part of the solution. So, for example, some of the items the EU Commission is looking to propose as part of the Repower EU initiative, things like diversification of gas supply and routes, contingency planning on behalf of the EU around security of supply, and also enhancing connectivity with the immediate neighborhood. So these are some of the I picked there some of the points from this initial plan that the EU has. And as I mentioned, the East Med being close proximity to the EU, it's in a good position to be a reliable supplier to the EU.
Okay, let me ask you a kind of follow-up on that, though. I mean, with Cyprus's gas discoveries to date, we've got 2, 3, depending on how we classify Calypso. Could you see the EU possibly subsidizing or finding a way to promote the development of those gas discoveries to help eventually Europe diversify its supply?
I think for sure they'll be looking at ways to incentivize the diversification of supply routes. And that can come in a number of ways. Obviously, there's issues around infrastructure. So I think in the past, we've seen lots of support for investments for regasification facilities, and a classic example is in Cyprus also, where we've had EU grant support for the regasification facility in Cyprus. So the EU in the past has helped the funding of key infrastructure. There's also the East Med pipeline, which is still a project of common interest that the EU is supporting in terms of the study work that's happening now, and that's looking to progress and complete those studies by the end of the year. That's the infrastructure part. In terms of the market itself, and there's been some signals from the EU around collective agreements for gas purchasing, and again, that's in a situation where the market, I mentioned before the Ukraine crisis, there was a lot of volatility in the markets, and with the EU transition goals, there is, I would say, less incentive from the wholesale buyers to commit to long-term contracts. Now, with the Ukraine crisis and looking at this diversification of supply, further work which the EU is signaling on the purchasing of gas will also help further support the long-term purchasing of gas, which in itself supports the investment decisions for the midstream and the upstream to support that supply.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Moving to the upstream, we've just seen the Glaucus appraisal wells just wrapped up and the drill ships headed off. the energy minister, said last week that she was expecting developments regarding Cyprus's offshore discoveries soon and in the near future. We've recently seen somewhat of a hiatus on offshore drilling and activity over the last 2 years. I mean, that's understandable considering the pandemic and the oil price collapse that ensued. But do you think that the recent recovery in oil prices and gas prices, of course, and Europe's imminent thirst for non-Russian gas could and should encourage the firms that are active in Cyprus's offshore, Chevron, Eni, Total Energies as they're called now, ExxonMobil, to possibly be more incentivized and to look for ways to develop the gas that they've discovered offshore Cyprus?
I think to answer that question, I'll frame it in terms of the momentum into what we're doing. So you know yourself, being based on the island towards the end of 2019, where we issued the first exploitation license in Cyprus for Aphrodite, and then we were going into 2020 with quite an extensive appraisal and drilling program. I think it was up to 5 well plans going into 2020, and then we had the impact of the COVID pandemic, where we had, as you mentioned, the postponement of some of the drilling activities, and I think globally a general holdback on investment from the IOCs. The momentum is back. As you mentioned, the Glafkos appraisal drilling has just been concluded. We've got plans for Eni and Total to drill in 2022. And as you know, during the pandemic, we had the takeover of Noble by Chevron, and they're reassessing the plan for Aphrodite, and we're imminently waiting for them to come and tell us the next steps for Aphrodite, which could include some ways to collaborate or cooperate with existing infrastructure in Egypt. So our momentum is back, and the timing of that momentum coming back is good for Cyprus, and we are seeing obviously in the market some good price support for energy prices, and we expect that to be maintained in the medium term. The long-term fundamentals for natural gas and LNG in particular, even in various energy transition scenarios, is good. Volatility could be an issue of concern for investors, as I mentioned previously, and the other aspect of that, which I mentioned previously, is around specifically for the EU, the marketing structure regarding long-term gas contracts to support the upstream and midstream projects. But as I mentioned, the EU is signaling that it's recognizing that and seeing how to facilitate that. So the momentum is back with us. We are looking at the IOCs continuing to invest in Cyprus with drilling and supporting the other work that's required. So I would say it's quite a positive outlook, but there's still work to be done.
Okay, great. How do you see Cyprus's chairing of the East Mediterranean Gas Forum this year impacting that as well? I mean, it could be a pivotal year, like you say. The momentum's back. Could be more drilling. Do you think Cyprus's position within that forum could contribute to helping develop the gas fields? How else could it possibly contribute to Cyprus's upstream ambitions?
Yeah, so it's I'm not sure it's more as a fact for Cyprus, but collectively it's good for all the members of the EMGF that they have founded the EMGF and it exists. So it's a relatively newly established entity. It has clear goals in terms of developing a competitive regional gas industry and a regional market. But it's for the collective benefit of its members and has the potential to benefit beyond that. Cyprus is chairing the EMGF this year, and coincidentally, CHC is also the vice chair of the Gas Industry Advisory Committee. This is the part of the EMGF that's the where the industry participates, such that it can have a way of communicating and recommending the certain policies that will further encourage the right investment from the industry. To achieve its goals, the EMGF is working towards aligning the regional policies. And like I said, it's this alignment of policies that is going to enable all the countries, including Cyprus, to benefit from more gas being produced, more gas to be transported and exported, and generally more natural gas to be available to displace heavier emitting sources of energy, which feeds into the energy transition objectives that we all aspire to.
Let's move on to what's on everyone's lips these days, the energy transition. It's in full flow and progress is being made on interconnectors between Israel and Cyprus and Egypt. Is CHC also eyeing a shift of focus to possibly more renewable energies, shifting away from oil and gas? What sort of plans could that include? Or will CHC focus more on minimizing the carbon intensity if and when it finally develops the gas discoveries offshore Cyprus?
Yeah, I would say it's more the when than the if, Peter. But you're right that the focus has been primarily in supporting the Cyprus government in the development of our offshore natural gas resources. And a key element of that has been, I would say, even up to 3-4 years ago, where we started looking at the impact of the energy transition, was around the assessments of the carbon intensity of our future offshore developments, and recognizing that minimizing that carbon intensity can also lead to the natural gas being produced to be more competitive. And that's when you include the policies around carbon taxing, the EU TS, EU emissions trading system, as it's called in the EU, and what impact that might have on investment decisions for any future projects. So we have been, I would say, in the recent past, just focused on that, and we've done lots of work on that, working on the maturity of technologies and applying that technology and how that could be applied to our future gas developments. It's the case for us that it's because you're going to be starting something new, you can hardwire in a lot of these applications from the beginning, rather than it being a mature or brownfield area where you're trying to shoehorn in and adapt the way you are producing the oil or gas to accommodate this.
Okay, so some really interesting bits there. Thanks, Pete. And I think that, as Demetris says, global gas markets were already tight even before the Ukraine invasion. And it seems that Cyprus is confident that momentum is returning to the industry generally, but also in particular to the Cypriot upstream sector. I mean, do you agree with that assessment from everything that you're seeing?
Well, looking at it from the perspective here in Cyprus, yes, it's an exciting time, and it looks like some key decisions are going to be made very soon. It's just what those key decisions are going to be. If we look at ExxonMobil, they've recently just wrapped up drilling an appraisal well at the Galapagos the discovery, 5 to 8 TCF 2019 discovery. So we're waiting to hear back from ExxonMobil on what their findings are there, and then beyond that, there's Eni and Total, who prior to the COVID pandemic had been planning to drill 7 or 8 wells offshore Cyprus, and as Demetris alluded to there, that they have alleged plans to drill later this year. Now, things that I've been hearing are not as good as that. Let's say not as confident. I think some of the murmurs have been that Eni has been looking to maybe farm out some of its blocks there, and also Total and Eni looking to delay drilling for as long as they can. Now, how long they can keep pushing drilling back with oil prices now above $100 per barrel, and the relaxations from COVID coming into force. So there's no trouble in getting personnel onto the island for any drilling campaigns. It remains to be seen. And then ahead, beyond that, we've also got Chevron, who, as Demetris said, are going to be on the island. I think they're expecting a delegation sometime in May to let them know what their plan is for Aphrodite. I mean, Cyprus was unlucky here in 2019 when Noble and Delek at the time, and Shell, the partners at Aphrodite, managed to renegotiate the production sharing contract with Cyprus to finally get Aphrodite gas out of the ground after it was discovered in late 2011. Then we had the COVID pandemic hit, and subsequent oil price collapse, and all of the uncertainty that came with that. And then you had Chevron take over Noble, and they went back to the drawing board to look at the development plan. It was all kind of very put things in reverse, let's put it that way, for Cyprus. So, we are expecting some news. We're hoping it's good news. We're hoping Chevron has found a way to include Aphrodite development in what looks like the next phase of development of its giant Leviathan field next door in Israel. But I guess time will tell at this stage.
So, one thing you said there was, a lot of key decisions to be made in the near term. Is that solely from a corporate perspective, or is this also decisions that we're waiting on from government on a regulatory basis?
No, I think for Cyprus, it's very much let's get things moving. I think there's no delay or bureaucratic delay in Cyprus at the minute. I think they're waiting for the companies to make a decision on what their plans are, on what their long-term plans are, and so I think we're waiting on the companies. It's more of a corporate decision at this stage. So I guess it depends on what those companies see as making a profit for them, and what potential there are for discoveries. So, with Exxon drilling Galapagos, pardon me, it depends on the size of the prospect. So they were assuming 5 to 8 TCF, and Exxon's preferred option, they've said, is to build a land-based LNG plant onshore Cyprus. Now, those sorts of volumes can't really justify building a land-based LNG facility here in Cyprus. So what's the next option? The next option would be possibly looking towards towards Egypt. Now, Egypt and Cyprus have got unitization agreements. They've got intergovernment agreements. So there shouldn't be any blocking anything to block possibly sending gas from Block 10 to Egypt. While for Cyprus and Israel, things aren't as clear cut. There isn't a unitization agreement, and there's still some form of dispute between the Aphrodite partners in Block 12 and the Ishai partners in Israeli waters. I mean, there's no dispute that some of Aphrodite does lie in Israeli waters. It's just the volumes. So there are certainly some governmental decisions that need to be taken, but I think mainly we are looking at corporate decisions here rather than political ones.
Okay. One of the things that he said as well was kind of just that, the East Med and Cyprus in particular are well placed to be kind of part of the solution of the EU's energy security concerns. Obviously proximity to the key European markets is obviously better from Cyprus than it is bringing LNG across from Australia, the US, or Qatar. Do you think that, you kind of touched on it there, the possibility of Exxon having a land-based LNG export facility on Cyprus, or versus the option of exporting through Israel or straight via Egypt's facilities? So do you think that development of Cyprus's gas is likely to be through domestic facilities or kind of part of a unified regional hub, or could we perhaps see Aphrodite going through Egypt and then some of the other discoveries going straight off from Cyprus, kind of a mixed development?
Well, I mean, we're still waiting on Eni to drill an appraisal well at their discovery, the Calypso discovery, which was made a year before Galapagos, so in 2018. So they could possibly aggregate all of the discoveries and bring them onshore. It's a bit of a long shot at the minute, I think. I mean, especially when there seems to be a rush, should we put it that way, for gas. Cyprus itself burns diesel in its own power plants. It does have plans to moor a floating storage and regasification unit offshore here, where they would import the natural gas, but those plans have been delayed, and it doesn't look like that will be operational until maybe 2024. I think, I mean, try to answer your question, what's the most likely scenario? The most likely scenario is probably tying them into the already existing facilities offshore, on the coast in Egypt, at Idku and Damietta for now. But beyond that, Chevron does have plans for a floating LNG facility, possibly as the next phase of its Leviathan project, and volumes could potentially be tied in there as well. But again, that's something that's still in its infancy. The companies that are in Leviathan, they've still yet to decide on what their plans are. I mean, one of their plans is also to pipe gas to Egypt as well, to Idku possibly, and then of course there's the other option that has been brought back onto the table in recent weeks, which is piping gas to Turkey. So, I mean, for Cyprus, that would be unthinkable to an extent, but who knows? I mean, I've said it before. Go on. Sorry.
I was just going to say, we've had some pretty unthinkable developments in the region in recent years. Certainly no one would have guessed about the UAE normalizing relations with Israel.
Well, exactly, yeah.
As they did, and then Mubadala farming into key Israeli assets as well. And that was unthinkable just 2-3 years ago.
If someone had told you that 2-3 years ago, you would have admitted them to an insane asylum, possibly. I think it's and when it comes to Israel, it's never say never. I think over the last 5 years, let's say, I mean, look at the gas to Egypt. Plenty of people were saying that's never going to happen. Egypt would never accept importing gas from Israel. Look at what happened in 2012 when gas flowed in the opposite direction. Egyptian politicians were put in jail for it. So people certainly doubted that it could happen, and then it did happen, and then we moved on to the next. But surely, the gas to Jordan won't happen either, and then that happened, and like you said, the Mubadala farming to Tamar happened, and people were gobsmacked again, and Israel's improving ties with its Arab neighbours and opening up further opportunities. So, I mean, on the surface of it, a pipeline from Leviathan to Turkey that goes through the Cypriot exclusive economic zone looks unlikely. Let's put it that way. But never say never.
Never say never. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy as well that Cyprus is looking to monetize its gas assets while also kind of moving towards importing gas as well. So, I mean, I guess the good thing for Cyprus at the moment is that they're not dependent on any Russian gas supplies. The bad thing is that they're burning diesel instead. But yeah. I mean, was there anything else kind of in particular that stood out to you from what Demetris said?
Well, I mean, it's a positive note that Cyprus is looking to carbon capture. I mean, the energy transition is what's on everyone's lips at the moment, and it makes it a lot easier that Cyprus doesn't have anything currently developed. Therefore, they can implement those kind of carbon capture technologies into any new developments. But the man on the street is paying for it out of his pocket at the minute. Cyprus is paying heavy fines to the EU for not meeting its carbon goals. Electricity prices are sky high at the minute. Prices at the pump are sky high at the minute. There doesn't seem to be much hope on the horizon. I mean, let's say 2024 is when Cyprus could potentially start importing LNG, but other countries are looking to, increase their renewables to 50% of their fuel mix, while Cyprus is still scrambling around trying to import LNG. It does feel like they have slightly missed the boat here, but things change very quickly, as we've seen in the last couple of months. And maybe Europe's need for natural gas could push policymakers to help subsidise part of the development of these gas finds. Who knows? I guess we'll see.
Yeah, certainly. What Demetris was saying about Cyprus being able to install some of these carbon capture technologies and other things to mitigate carbon emissions, because it's greenfield facilities rather than retrofitting existing facilities. They, to some extent, whether that quite makes up for the lengthy delays in Cyprus moving towards getting this off the ground is another question. But it's certainly something that you hear whenever you talk to anybody in the industry. So, let's look at Qatar. They're obviously massively expanding their LNG facilities, and they are very much talking a good game about how these are going to be the cleanest facilities in the world. And speaking to people to do with Egypt as well, they're talking. I've certainly spoken to figures there saying that if they move with a direct LNG facilities themselves, that they're bragging about how low emission the gas there is, and about how they can make sure that any export facilities will be similarly low carbon footprints. It's going to be a key marketing tool going forward, I think, is the ability to say, look, not all hydrocarbons are bad. Ours is the cleanest on the market, so come buy from us.
Yeah, of course. And I think places like Egypt and Qatar, that they set their own goals for themselves as opposed to having the EU over their shoulders. So to an extent, they can boast about what they do, but on the other hand, I think no one's pushing them to do it. So it is a positive note there.
Well, we'll end it on a positive note for Cyprus and its nascent LNG industry. Obviously, we'll see whether they are able to capitalize on the European market's renewed desire for energy security, and see how that meshes with individual countries' energy transition goals, whether the LNG can get a renewed lease of life. So, Peter Stevenson, thank you very much for joining us today, and great chat with CHC.
Thanks, Jamie.